I took my S1, S2, S3 in National University. Do you have any suggestions, or maybe you have something to share in regards to your experience to be international academicians?
Well, I can have a lot of things to say about regarding this, but maybe we can arrange a session or two to share about this kind of experience.
Thank you for joining us, Bapak. So maybe we are ready to initiate the conference because we already have our keynote speaker in here. So for the place and time, I bring it forward to you, Bapak Pungki.
Thank you. Okay. Okay, is it on me now?
Sorry, pardon my mistake, because we have a host in here from MC,
okay.
UKM MC, our students.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Is my voice clear?
Yep.
Clear, okay, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, please make sure to turn on your camera and mute your microphone as we are about to begin the program. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Shalom, Om Swastiastu. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and a warm welcome to all of the guests to the third International Conference on Law Studies 2021, held on April 23rd, 2021. Ladies and gentlemen, the conference was hosted and organized by the Faculty of Law, Universitas Pembangunan Nasional Veteran Jakarta, with the interesting main theme, Law Enforcement in Pandemic COVID-19 Era Experience and Comparison in Global Context. My name is Asfiada Mistria. It's a precious opportunity to welcome you and be your master of ceremony for this wonderful occasion. We would like to recognize and say our most gratitude to the Honorable Director of Universitas Pembangunan Nasional Veteran Jakarta, Dr. Erna Hernawati, AKCPM ACA, the Dean of the Faculty of Law, Dr. Abdul Halim MAG, and today's keynote speaker, Professor Dr. Jimli Ashidik SH.MH, the first Chief Justice of Indonesia's Constitutional Court. And it's an honor to introduce and welcome the speakers for today's event. Christopher Kaysen, BA/JD LLM from the University of Washington School of Law, USA. Associated Professor Dr. Hartini Saripan from University Teknologi Mara, Malaysia. Dr. Diani Sadiawati, SH LLM from Universitas Pembangunan Nasional Veteran Jakarta. And last but not least, Professor Jaco Barkuizen from the University of Limpopo, Polokwane, South Africa. I would like to inform you about today's schedule, which starts with the opening ceremony, the welcoming speech, presentation from the keynote speaker, panel discussion, debriefing session, break time, panel presentation, and last is closing ceremony. For a brief moment, we would like to ask all of you participants to sing the Indonesian anthem, Indonesia Raya, and Mars Bela Negara. Thank you for your participation. We are now going to listen to the welcoming speech by the Dean of the Faculty of Law, Universitas Pembangunan Nasional Veteran Jakarta. Please welcome Dr. Abdul Halim MAG. The time is yours.
Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera, Om Swastiastu. Honorable Keynote Speaker, Bapak Profesor Dr. Jimli As-Siddiqui. Honorable Speakers, Professor Jaco Berkuizen from University of Limpopo, South Africa. Dr. Christopher Casson from University of Washington School of Law. Associate Professor Ibu Hartini Sarifan, Dean of Faculty of Law, UITM, Malaysia. Ibu Dr. Diani Sadiawati from Faculty of Law, University Pembangunan Nasional Veteran Jakarta. Also, distinguished guests and participants. I welcome you to the third International Conference on Law Studies. Thank you for all your dedication and participation in making this conference happen amid of pandemic. This conference belongs as a part of Faculty of Law 21st anniversary celebration. As we know, Faculty of Law was established at 24th April 2000. We are grateful that along the year, we have become one of the prominent universities in Indonesia. We are still striving to develop our faculty in many aspects, such as academic, curriculum, human resources, researches, and publication. We aspire to keep the progress ahead. For that reason, we aim to have more collaborations and widen our network with other universities across the world. Honorably, ladies and gentlemen, we are now experiencing multi-dimension crisis, not only in health, yet also in economy, social, politics, law, and others. As an academician, we have a moral burden more than ever to actualize science and knowledge that can solve the challenge of time. The theme of the International Conference on Law Studies 2021 is law enforcement in pandemic COVID-19 era, experience and comprehension in global context. It is aimed to dedicate our competence as a legal scholar to have a real contribution to the course on law. We are truly grateful to have high qualified speaker with us today. Professor Jim Lee, who has wide knowledge in Indonesian legal constitution and has contributed a lot of establishment of Indonesian Mahkamah Konstitusi today. Professor Jacko, who has very extensive knowledge not only criminology yet also in human science victimology. We hope that our department criminology can have a further research collaboration with University of Limpopo. Dr. Christopher Carson, who has consistently worked for the human rights and has comprehensive work in establishing Indonesian Journal of International Law, we have also for further collaboration in publication. Ibu Dr. Diani, the expert in international law and state development, we are thankful to have you who has continuously assist us in Faculty of Law UVN Veteran Jakarta. Professor Hartini Sarifan, who has robust understanding and research and technology law, especially in cyber law and electronic commerce. We have this only the beginning of our collaboration. Instead of continuously seeing pandemic as an obstacle, I urge you to also look for an opportunity brought off by the crisis. Pandemic has become the best time for us to reflect and take a step back to muse how long we have gone by. Particularly, the role of a legal scholar is expected to be more active and in anticipating any possibilities, to be more critical in observing a social phenomenon, and to be more vigilant with the progress of social science in general. For all participants who have dedicated time to participate in this conference and share valuable work with us, I hope this conference will serve as a platform for stimulation and intellectual curiosity, triggering academic discussion and creating network among all of researchers, academic, professional, across different backgrounds. Should this not be the last collaboration, yet let this be the beginning for us to say to promising future as a one family, the people of world. Lastly, we apologize for all and thank you to keynote speaker, participant, and committee of this conference. And see you again at the next conference without COVID-19 with offline conference in Jakarta, inshallah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Mr. Halim, for the wonderful welcoming speech. Now there will be a presentation delivered by the keynote speaker, Professor Dr. Jimli Ashirik, SHMH. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Ashirik. The time is yours.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I would like to thank and appreciate with the honor for me to share ideas, information, experience regarding the topic of this very important seminar. And it is also important that this seminar be a success and hopefully will be the examples for other universities and faculty of law of other universities to organize this kind of forum, very important forum, to enhance and to motivate young lawyers, students, and also lecturers to share ideas among others, including on the issues of very important, like the issue of emergency law, emergency conditions of states, which is Indonesia is known to be one of the country have so many kinds of accidents, incidents, natural resources almost every years, every 3 months even, that we have to be ready to respond constitutionally. How that kind of emergency problems be handled without violating the constitutional rules, constitutional principles. And of course, I would like to speak just in brief, and very sorry that I cannot come physically to your forum with this limitations through Zooming. I hope that I can share the opinion, which is already actually written in my several books concerning this this COVID, especially on the issue of COVID-19, or in the other books I wrote, especially on the issue of Hukum Tata Negara Darurat. Hukum Tata Negara Darurat, emergency constitutional law, which is in Indonesia, I consider very limited attentions among lawyers, among professors, among students, very limited people, limited lawyer who pay enough attention on the need to understand that in our legal system, and not only our legal system, actually in any country's modern legal system, modern constitutional system, there are two kinds of conditions: normal condition and abnormal condition. So constitutional law comprise of these both, normal constitutional law and abnormal constitutional law. These two kinds of conditions must be understood, that whenever our country have to respond to the problem of emergency conditions, then the constitutional law in normal condition cannot be prevail as it is. But on the other hand, in Dutch word, normal tijd, normal recht for normal tijd, while abnormal recht for abnormal tijd, meaning that only normal law should prevail during the normal condition, but during the abnormal condition, the law of abnormality must prevail. So these two kinds of condition, two kinds of legal system must be according to the condition. Without that, there will be no truth, there will be no justice at all. Because if you apply normal law into the abnormal condition, there will be no justice. Or on the other hand, if you apply abnormal law during the normal condition, there will be no justice either. So because of that, these two kinds of legal system, constitutional system must be understood very carefully. Now, how constitutional countries handle or response to the problem of COVID-19 so far in the last 2 years or 1.5 years already. More than 100 constitutional countries have declared emergency measures or state of emergency to respond to this COVID-19 pandemic in 2 years. And actually, almost 90% of all countries, constitutional countries, actually have their own constitutional rules or have constitutionalized the provisions of emergency in the written constitutions, meaning that including Indonesia, modern constitution have adopted special rules on the issue of emergency law. In Indonesian constitution, 1945 constitution, we know that there is Article 12. It is the only articles dedicated by the framers of our constitutions as the exit permit to apply, to handle, to respond, constitutional response to this kind of pandemic, which is need to be declared as a state of emergency. But unluckily, during the pandemic, we declare not according to Article 12 of 1945 Constitution. We just declare just according to the law of health guarantee and the law of disaster management. These two laws is not based on Article 12 of Indonesian 1945 Constitution, meaning that there was no declaration of emergency condition, state of emergency at all in Indonesia. While everybody knows that this disaster, this pandemic is already 2 years, then the principles that salus populi suprema lex esto must prevail. Why? Because the conditions of the pandemic is very dangerous and very and has to change the way the country, the government handle and respond to the problem. Cannot use the normal law anymore, normal regulation anymore. So this should be handled unorthodoxy mindset. Then because of that, we have, and the government has to violate many rules of the game, which is already regulated under the law, and so many laws should be postponed or should be violated temporarily during this COVID-19, and all of this has no constitutional basis at all, because there was no official declaration of state of emergency according to Article 12. Now, this of course, I always say that Indonesia has applied emergency de facto, but not de jure. Of course, everybody and all the people support the policy of the government because of the principle of salus populi suprema lex, because we have to prioritize the safety of the people. So very little people criticize this legal action, but actually this is the task of lawyers, of constitution lawyers, and all the lawyers, that for the future there must be improvement in the legal system and legal approach to the pandemic, to the problem like pandemic, this kind of COVID-19 pandemic. Now, because of this, as you know that, as I mentioned, more than 100 countries have declared emergency measures or state of emergency to respond to this COVID-19 pandemic. And because of that, not only in the law application, but also in law-making process and law enforcing process, of course, it not uses the normal regulation. Unorthodoxy prevail, and all the agency, including the parliament, look how the parliament acts or take decision in making a new law. Look, there is no public participation, there is no public debate, there is no substantive deliberation in those so many laws, including the omnibus law, which is the first experience happening in Indonesia using omnibus technique in legislating. It makes the longest law in the history of Indonesia, but it is just 100 days. It is decided without debate in the parliament. So the way law-making process also violating so many rules of the game, including also law enforcement. Yeah. So the law enforcement mostly so many that it is not really according to the normal law. Everybody use the abnormal law, but actually the basis, constitutional basis for that, there should be at first declaration of state of emergency according to Article 12 of the 1945 Constitution, but it was not. It was just declared by the president as emergency, but not constitutional emergency according to Article 12, just according what is regulated under the law of disaster management and the law of health guarantee. So this is debatable, of course, but again, as I mentioned just now, most people agree with the action taken by the government because salus populi suprema lex esto. Everybody agree with that principles. So this is, I call emergency de facto, but not actually, not de jure. So this is what is happening here in Indonesia. And I think they are also happening in more than 100 countries, which has declared emergency measures, not only Indonesia. Some countries use the measures like Indonesia also, not according to the constitution, but many countries according to their constitution. But of course, during this pandemic, it shows there is a trend that during the pandemic, the shift of power, more power, yes, shifting to the executive. So the government has more powerful than before. And the power of the parliament, the control, is weakened during this pandemic. The second one is that the civic liberty is also experiencing from the reduction of civic liberty. It is happening in Indonesia and also even in America, even in other countries. So these two kinds of weakness or danger is happening everywhere because of the COVID-19. And the third is the trend, dangerous trend to the quality of rule of law, especially in lawmaking process and law enforcement process. It is happening not only in Indonesia, but also everywhere. This is it is why, yeah, that is why in book written 50 years ago by Clinton Rossiter, this emergency law is he called it constitutional dictatorship. It has become the title of his book, Constitutional Dictatorship, but constitutional. So we have to be very careful with this word, with this situation, that in the future we have to install, we have to develop the preparedness of our constitutional system better than today, so that whenever happening again this kind of condition, the constitutional response, the government response is really according to what is ruled in by our constitutions. Today, not yet. Why this must be differentiated between normal constitutional law and abnormal constitutional law? Because this will create problem if the politics change later on. Because during the Corona-19 pandemic, the power of the central power of political power of the government, very strong, very strong. So he can do anything, and it is not rule of law even, but rule by law. So law is just being used to decide whatever political interest of the central power of the government to be, then supported by all the functions, branch of power. Even the parliament is very weak today. When for example, the one law is without any program before, like for example, law on the structure of cabinet. It is a law, but without any preparation, even it is not included in the list of prolegnas, but in only some days, it is already adopted by the parliament that the plan by the president to change the structure of that cabinet is legalized, approved by the parliament. So this shows the weakness of the parliament in controlling the power of the executive. So this happening here in Indonesia, it is also happened everywhere in the world. So it is now the time for us to reevaluate about the existence of Indonesian Articles of 12. That is the only exit permit to the validity of any constitutional actions against emergency condition, which is until today is always considered as something should be avoided, because during the old order regime and also the new order regime under Suharto and before under President Sukarno, this article was so many times misused by the government, both by the old regime and also by the new regime, and the old order regime or the old order regime. Because of that, you know that the law which is implementing the Article 12, it was issued in 1959. The law of emergency law, which is the elaborations of Article 12 of 1945 Constitution until now is still valid, but it is very obsolete already because it was issued in 1959. And so many times we try to revise this law because it is already outdated. For example, in 1959, our Indonesian government system still parliamentary. So it is stated in that law, Prime Minister. And also during that time, there was no Panglima TNI, Commander-in-Chief of the military. Rather, it is Chief of Staff of Army, Naval, and also Air Force. So there is no Panglima TNI, but there was Prime Minister. So it is stated in that law of emergency 1959, meaning that this law is really, really obsolete. But the jure, officially, this law is still valid until now. Now, the problem is that whenever we try to apply the principles stated in 12th article of 1945 Constitution, we need a new law. So during the reform era, under Habibie era, there was a law already adopted in the parliament titled PKB, Penanggulangan Keadaan Bahaya, Danger Management. The law of danger management. It was already adopted by the parliament, but since there was a very big demonstrations against that law, so the president during that time did not sign that law and did not promulgate that law, and it is now it is not valid. And until now, there is no one effort to revise that 1959 law. But for the future, I hope that because of this experience in dealing with this COVID-19, the future should be used to anticipate another problem like COVID-19. We have to install a new law and we have to revise our legal system, especially in dealing with emergency law. Emergency law during the war or military operation, and more importantly is emergency law during the civil emergency. This is both because of natural resources or non-natural resources, non-natural resources and non-natural resources disaster. Disaster because of the nature or non-nature disaster. So these two kinds of emergency, military emergency, and civil emergency should be differentiated. And especially, we really in need to have this rule of the game dealing with civil emergency in the future. Otherwise, there will be many problems, like, for example, the way to declare the condition. According to disaster management law, each head of province may declare emergency law. But according to the constitution, it cannot be like that because this is unitary state. So the change of character of law should be by the head of state, the governor. So that there is two conceptions of declaration. So declaration in disaster management law is only dealing with technical things, but does not based on the understanding. But the declarations of changing the condition is also changing the characteristic of legal system from normal to abnormal. During the abnormal, we can postpone, we can, set aside constitutional rules even we can violate human rights, except Article 28I versus 1. It is the non-derigible rights that cannot be violated during any condition, including during the emergency condition. Article 28I versus 1 cannot be violated in any condition. But the rest may be violated or may be postponed, the validity, because of the declarations of constitutional condition or constitutionally declared, and it changed the characteristic of legal system. These kind of things sometimes cannot be understood very, very well by the lawyer. Because of that, until now, almost all the law relating to the disaster, no one referred to Article 12. All are referring only technical things that it cannot violate human rights. It cannot violate the Constitution at all. So this is what I would like to suggest, that this very good experience of all nations, all constitutional countries, especially for Indonesia, we use this for the future. We use this experience to revise or reinstall our constitutional system, legal system, especially dealing with emergency conditions like COVID-19. And I hope that by inviting speakers from other countries, so I would like to express my appreciations to all the speakers. We would like to learn also from the experience of other countries, and not only we take note that today not only the idea and the practices of the rule of law, Rechtsstaat, but also the quality and the integrity of democracy in the world now being shrinking, regressions. It is happening everywhere. So it is not only in one or two countries, all countries now shrinking trend of the quality of democracy. And of course, Indonesia is the third largest in terms of quantity of the population, the third largest democracy in the world. But according to the democratic index, worldly index, it is today only in the list of 64, meaning the quantity is number 3, but the quality is just number 64. Then it is the task of Indonesian lawyers, Indonesian government, Indonesian politicians, and those who take the responsibility of lawmaking and law enforcing, and in the future to improve this performance of Indonesian democracy and also Indonesian rule of law, because in the rule of law and democracy is two sides of the same coin. We cannot just choose one and neglect the other. So because of that, in Indonesian Constitution, Article 1, point 2 and point 3, Article 1 stating about Indonesia is a democratic country, and number 3, Indonesia is democratic country or the rule of law. Indonesia is the rule of law. Indonesia is Rechtsstaat. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. That was a very insightful speech regarding our main theme. Thank you very much, Mr. Ashidik. Let's move to the next agenda. There will be the panel discussion and debriefing session. This interesting sessions will be moderated by Mas Pungki Hendra Wijaya, PhD. A brief introduction about Mr. Wijaya. He graduated from Curtin University, Perth, Doctor of Philosophy, PhD in Business Law. He got plenty of working experiences such as Senior Legal Advisor in Institutional Affairs and Governance, Ministry of Administrative and Bureaucratic Reform of the Republic of Indonesia, Research or Teaching Assistant and PhD candidate in Curtin University School of Law, and Subdivision Head Evaluation of Institutional Policies, Ministry of Administrative and Bureaucratic Reform of the Republic of Indonesia. He got milestones such as in trainings, business process development for government organizations course, Australian DFAT, Jakarta 2015, and governance and business process, Copenhagen Business School in Denmark. And international assignment experiences, research assistant Curtin University in Western Australia, and assessing reorganization of Indonesian embassies in various countries in Japan, USA, Switzerland, Denmark, the Netherlands, and France. And now the panel discussion will be taken over by our moderator. Hello, Mr. Wijaya.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you
Ladies
so
and
much.
gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Wijaya. The time is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Master of Ceremony. Good morning to you all, and I hope you all are ready for this panel discussion, and I hope you are all in good health. Okay, first I would like to give a warm welcome to our four distinguished and magnificent great speakers. The topic of this conference is a law enforcement in pandemic COVID-19 era experience and comparison in global context. We are now currently have our four magnificent speakers to speak on this topic. Please, first of all, please allow me to read the profile of our distinguished and great speakers. The first speaker is Mr. Christopher Casson from the University of Washington School of Law. He will speak on U.S. law enforcement during COVID-19, the federal system in the United States laying bare the flaws in federalism. Mr. Casson is also a senior lecturer at the Islamic University of Indonesia in Yogyakarta. From 2013, he served as a program director for the Institute for Migrant Rights in Cianjur in Indonesia. And Mr. Casson obtained his Bachelor of Arts in English and Business from Washington State University in 1994. In 1998, he obtained his Doctor of Jurisprudence from Seattle University School of Law. Then in 2019, he obtained his LLM from University of Miami School of Law in Florida. Previously, in 1997 to 2007, he was the associate attorney at Laser Hobbs, Sheffield, Sperry, and Eberson PLLC, Washington. And in 2003 to 2007, he was one of the legal study lecturer at Seattle Pacific University in Washington. Our second speaker is Dr. Diani Sadiawati from the UPN Veteran University Jakarta. Dr. Diani obtained her law degree from University of Indonesia. Then in 1996, she obtained her LLM from Leiden University in Netherlands. And then Ms. Sadiawati obtained her doctorate from the University of Diponegoro in 2010. Along her career, Dr. Diani has served the Ministry of National Development Planning, or Bappenas, for more than 20 years. Along these years, she also became the Chief of Law Division, Director of Law and Communications, then Director of Law and Human Rights, and now she is the expert staff at the Ministry of PPN or Bappenas. She was also become one of the committee of the Chief of KPK Selections. And our third speaker is Associate Professor Dr. Hartini Saripan. She is the Dean of Faculty of Law at the University Technology Mara, Malaysia. She will give a presentation with the topic on how we enforce the rules relating to the safety and movement control during the pandemic. Professor Hartini is an associate professor at the Faculty of Law, University of Technology Mara, Malaysia. She served the UITM for almost 18 years and is currently the Dean of the UITM Faculty of Law. She received her PhD in law from UITM. She started her research work on cyber law, focusing on electronic commerce and digital signature law. She later expanded her work to deliver into technology law. Specializing in robotic law and artificial intelligence. Other than that, she also supervised master and PhD candidates who studying the laws governing rehabilitative and assistive robots, artificial intelligence, online gambling, technology-facilitated human trafficking, as well as electronic conveyancing. She has presented her research at international and national conferences such as in Istanbul, Shanghai, Bangkok, Singapore, and Jakarta. As a pioneer researcher of robotic law and artificial intelligence in UITM law, she hopes to develop this dynamic area to prepare Malaysia for an enormous and unpredictable technological innovation and revolution. And then our last but not least speaker is Professor Jaco Barkhuizen from University of Limpopo, Polokwane, South Africa. Prof. Jaco is an associate professor at the Faculty of Law, University of Limpopo, South Africa. He obtained his bachelor degree in psychology and criminology degree at the University of Pretoria. Then he obtained his bachelor honors degree of psychology at the University of Port Elizabeth in 2001. And then in 2002, he obtained his Master of Arts degree at in psychology at the University of Pretoria. And in 2008, he obtained his PhD of victimology at Tokiwa University in Japan. His experiences are as follows, such as his involvement in professional activities include in Criminal Society of Africa President in 2018 to 2020, and then Criminology Society of South Africa ESCO and Council member in 2010 and 2018. And then he also editorial board member of Acta Criminologica in 2010, and then lifetime member World Society of Victimology in 2010. And he also member of World Society of Victimology, member of the Indonesian Society of Victimology Lecturers in 2006, and he also editorial board member of Law Journal in UNSUD in 2006. And he also international advisory member of Global Advances in Victimology and Studies in Psychology. So without further ado, I will give the time to the presenter, but first, each presenter will have 25 minutes to present their topic. But first, allow me to give the order on this panel presentation. The first presentation will be delivered by Mr. Kesens, and then the second presentation will be delivered by Dr. Diani Sadiawati, and then the third presentation will be delivered by Associate Professor Dr. Hartini Saripen, and the last presentation will be delivered by Professor Jaco Barkhuizen. After the panel presentation, then will be followed by the briefing session that will give us the opportunity for a question and answer. So without further ado, Mr. Kesens, the first presentation, the time is yours. Thank you so much.
Unmute. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you happen to be during this presentation. I see we have 492 participants, which is fantastic. One of the advantages of Zoom meetings during the pandemic is we can invite a lot of people. So thank you for the very kind and introduction, Dr. Vijaya. I appreciate it. And I also want to say thank you to Pak Dekan Abdul Hamid and Pak Rector Dr. Emma Hamawati for inviting me, as well as the committee. It's an honor, and as you're introducing my co-speakers, it's a pleasure to be here, and it's very humbling to be with so many experts on these issues. I also like to thank Justice As-Siddiqui for a very interesting presentation. It's a good way to follow up on that. So if I can, I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So yes, so obviously I've been asked to give sort of the American perspective or the American story, specifically on law enforcement during COVID-19. There's so many other issues to talk about. So this will hopefully specifically address the unique challenges of law enforcement during COVID-19. So sort of the overview is, you know, without talk, it's impossible to talk about the law without talking about the politics, especially in America over the last couple of years. Those two things are inseparable. The other thing that's necessary to know is a brief discussion of the federal system in America. I'm sure many of you have studied it. It's not very exciting, but it's really important to understanding some of the challenges we faced in law enforcement, our law enforcement measures. So those, I think, are inseparable. And finally, we'll talk about law enforcement. And I'll use the idiom between a rock and a hard place. And I think that sort of expresses all of the pandemic, meaning there's no good solutions, there's no right way, or there's no one only way. And so sort of expresses the challenges we faced. So of course, to start with a quote, you know, house divided itself cannot stand, and that sort of signals our politics. It's Abraham Lincoln. Some of you are familiar with him, although from Justice Siddiqui's presentation talking about suspending constitutional rights, as much as we love Abraham Lincoln, he was our only president to ever actually officially suspend, we say, habeas corpus, our primary constitutional protections. So, you know, again, when I was listening to the keynote speaker, a lot of these issues touched on, some of these constitutional issues as well. So, talking about the politics of the pandemic in the United States, it's very interesting listening to Justice Siddiqui talk about how the Indonesian people, at least the majority, the overwhelming majority, support the emergency measures. And although everybody, I'm sure, might not say that as we've just been locked down again right before Mudik, I think he's probably correct in saying that. The Indonesian people seem to have come together to address the pandemic. The situation in America, I would say, is completely the opposite in terms of how united we are in fighting the pandemic and the sacrifices that we have to make. And I have to admit, I'm a little biased. I can't be completely neutral as an American. And so I kind of look at the politics of the pandemic as, I'm going to try to play with my PowerPoint, as a divorce. And this is politics in America. So you can see the child in the middle. And the child in the middle is sort of the American people. And they're being pulled by these two separate sides. On the right, we have the mom who's thinking long term about the health of the child. You know, the child must eat its vegetables, must do its homework, must sleep at night. Well, the dad is thinking much more short term. Classic politician, just wants to be liked. So instead of vegetables, he gives the son candy. Instead of homework, he gives him an iPad. Instead of sleep, they go to Disneyland. And we actually have a term called Disneyland dad in America because of this divorce. And I kind of analogize that to the situation during the pandemic. There have been definitely two sides that have emerged. And we can actually put faces on these two sides. So again, our former president, Donald Trump, he was giving the candy to the child, the American people. He downplayed the pandemic. He rejected COVID restrictions. He was very focused on opening the economy and relied on sort of junk science to make everybody feel better and to kind of give them, what everybody wants, even though it's not what everybody needs. And this was in sharp contrast to our director of Center for Disease Control, Dr. Fauci. His focus was on medical information, very strict measures to lock down and et cetera. And of course, he's a doctor and not a whatever. So this is really divided in America. And so, whereas from Justice Asidiki's perspective that Indonesia has to fight the majority rule with this, respond constitutionally to this majority rule. We don't have a clear majority in America. And I'm going to talk a little bit by the end. I'll talk about how that has trickled down to how we are enforcing our laws. So the politics, this divided politics, has influenced how our people on the ground are enforcing our laws. So move on. These are the classic conflicts, as we all know. The Constitution versus federal law. How we, the Constitution are checks and balances. I think the biggest conflict we have is what we call freedom versus public health. And I put license as freedom because we have a little bit different expectation. But people want freedom to do things versus public health. And I think that also is what individualism versus collectivism. And America has a reputation for being very individualistic, being very selfish, you could say, versus the collective good. And so in crafting all of our laws and actually implementing law enforcement, these issues come into conflict with each other. So before understanding why the issues we have with law enforcement, I just want to take a step back and talk about our federal system in America. Federal system, we call it the United States. We're not the Republic of America. We are the United States of America. And the state governments in America have a great deal of power. Okay, Dr. Siddiqui focused on a little bit in Indonesia, how there's some independence and there's autonomous regions in Indonesia, but our independence of our states is built into our Constitution. So within the American system, we have governments within governments. So we have the US government with the three branches, the executive, the judicial, the legislative, but we also have state governments, executive, legislative, judicial. Each state has its own court system, which is independent of the federal court system. The executive is independent and does not answer to the executive branch of the American. And then there's, of course, the legislative. We have our own Senate and House of Representatives, depending on each of the 50 states. And then even within that, we have county city government, which has independence from the state government. So that independence has played a huge role in how how law enforcement runs all the time, but it's really been illustrated in our law enforcement's response to the pandemic. One interesting thing is what we call the Interstate Commerce Clause. And you can read it yourself. Congress shall have the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and the Indian tribes. So this is what this is a limitation on the federal government's power over the people. Okay, so we kind of say that in the absence of a specific constitutional provision giving power to the federal government, the government for the whole country, most of the legislative power is in the states. And it's kind of hard to see that from another country because if you look at CNN, all you hear about is our president and our Congress and our Supreme Court. But the real things that affect daily lives happen more on a state level, not on a federal level. And it's kind of hard to see if you read the news because it doesn't focus on those things as much. But since this is a law faculty, we'll talk about the law and concurrent jurisdictions. So the federal government often share with states and local jurisdictions, and this overlaps and can create a conflict between those three governments. And just on we start with the federal government, which is the whole country. We have the state government. We have 50 states, each with their own government. Within the states, there are county governments. Within each county, there are municipalities. Some large, some small. Cities are municipalities. And so all those the jurisdictional power sort of overlaps and creates conflicts. And you can see it with our law enforcement agencies. And if anybody's ever watched an American action movie, you've probably seen some conflict between the local police department and the FBI and the sheriff. In our movies, we kind of play that up a little bit, but it does cause. So my hometown, by the way, is Seattle, Washington. Maybe some of you have been there, maybe some of you are familiar. But if I'm in the middle of the city of Seattle, Washington, all of these different law enforcement agencies have concurrent jurisdiction over me as I'm walking around the city. There's the FBI, the federal government's investigative law enforcement division. There's the state patrol. Each state has its own independent police department. Every county has the sheriff and the sheriff's department. So within each county, we have the sheriff, and then within that, we have the Seattle Police Department. Okay, so all of these different law enforcement agencies now have been charged with dealing with this pandemic. Oh, I downloaded pictures of the car. So you've all seen movies. We got the State Patrol, the FBI, the Sheriff's Department, and then of course the Seattle Police Department. And so this is one thing that you have to understand this to understand how complicated this issue of law enforcement is when we're discussing those things. A little bit back to the legal side, talking about our jurisprudence. The Supreme Court has sort of expanded and contracted the power of the federal government versus the power of the state government. So originally, and we fought a civil war over it in America, originally the states, there was very small federal government. And the states almost acted as if they were independent countries. Then after the Civil War, the central government of America became much more powerful. And that's because of this interpretation of the Interstate Commerce Clause. So between 1801 and 1835, there's a series of cases. John Marshall is the guy in the picture. He was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He really was what expanded the role of federal government. However, in 1995, we had a case called United States v. Lopez, where the Supreme Court brought back, under Chief Justice Rehnquist, brought back the power and scaled back the authority of the federal government. It happened in a case, they created these gun-free zones in schools. So the federal government said within 1,000 meters of a school, you cannot have a gun in your possession. And they ruled that unconstitutional, saying that the federal government doesn't have the power to regulate a school district within an individual state. And that was really limiting the power of the federal government. Also, drug control, and says that drug control can affect commerce. And I didn't include this, but we have this really strange situation, which is an example of this. In my state of Washington, marijuana, ganja, is legal. You can buy it anywhere. You can grow it in your house. You can buy it. You can basically buy marijuana at 7-Eleven or Circle K. It's that legal. However, the people who sell it cannot have a bank account, because our banking system is governed by the federal government, which still rules that marijuana is illegal. So you can't have a banking account to sell marijuana. So it really illustrates this conflict between the federal law and the state law. And again, as we discuss the pandemic, that'll all be important. So, I don't want to spend too much time. I would love to save more time for questions. So I will just talk briefly about the law enforcement's role in what we'll call policing as a verb, policing the pandemic. So just a little rundown, and I think these are probably the same as COVID restrictions everywhere, or at least in a broad sense. You know, we have entrance to facilities. So whenever I go to Super Indo, right, they make sure I'm wearing a mask. They make me wash my hands, and they do a little temperature check, even to go to a mall, to go into any public place. They control entrance to facilities. Okay. Another category is social distancing. And this is mostly talking about limiting event size. How many people can gather in one place? Can we have indoor restaurants and bars in America? So keeping people socially distanced is another restriction. And then, of course, travel restrictions. So interstate travel, traveling around inside America, public transportation, and then, of course, border controls. So the reason I put this up here is they're all very common, but who enforces these laws, I think, is what is interesting and what makes it a little more unique. My experience in Indonesia, entrance to facilities is governed by security guard. He's got no legal authority, right? But people in
Mr.
Indonesia.
Kesset, sorry to remind you that you have just to remind you that you have 5 more minutes.
5 more minutes? Okay, I'll be done. Thank you. So entrance to facilities are very local. So law enforcement usually doesn't play a part in allowing people to enter facilities. There's fines for some businesses who don't control it, but there's no police officer sitting at the entrance to Costco making sure people can't get in. Social distancing, on the other hand, is handled on the state level. So state governors have imposed restrictions on gathering sizes and indoor dining. And this is probably the greatest source of controversy in America right now. And then we have the federal government deals with travel restrictions, interstate, the border control, airplanes and trains and buses, the FAA and NTSB. So we've got this intersperse of the different types of restrictions happen on different levels within the government. Here's been some news stories. County sheriff refuses to enforce coronavirus orders. Sheriff refuses to enforce restrictions. He tested positive, which is just kind of funny. Another sheriff won't enforce new COVID restrictions. And this all comes from that politics I talked about at the beginning. So if the county sheriff happens to be a Trump supporter, or happen to be a Trump supporter, they refuse to enforce these provisions. A hair salon owner went to jail in one place. 20% of New York Police Department officers are sick with coronavirus. And then man arrested for not wearing a mask in the courthouse. So these are all just small little news stories talking about the challenges of law enforcement. On the court side, we had a very important decision. A church sued the governor of California because they wanted to have church and it was on lockdown. And the Supreme Court decided that even though we usually give deference to the decision makers, these restrictions on church services violated the Constitution. So the Constitution here and that balancing act took priority over the health restrictions. On the opposite side, in Makovec versus Palm Beach County, there was a mask mandate. They required people to wear masks, and people sued. And the judge dismissed their case, and it was appealed, etc. The judge, and I just like to, there's 2 reasons I cite this case. One is because Palm Beach County is where President Trump lives right now. And the other reason is I love this quote: there's no constitutional or protected right to infect others. And I think that kind of brings together the constitutional value versus the public health issue. So in conclusion, this is sui generis. We don't know. It's constantly changing, and we constantly don't know how things will evolve. Things have already changed in America in the last 2 months. But most importantly, it illustrates this difficulty we have in our federal system, where on the law enforcement basis, we have all different levels of jurisdiction enforcing laws and regulations during the pandemic. So I look forward to your questions. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kesil, for the great presentation. I believe that all the attendees, all the participants in this conference would love to ask more questions in the debriefing sessions. It was a great insights of the U.S. political and legal system, and also the conflict between jurisdiction and how they related to the handling of the pandemic in the U.S. So we are now moving on to the second presentation from our second speakers, Ibu Diani. Ibu Diani, you have 25 minutes to present your topic, and now time is yours. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Pak Pungki, Dean of Faculty of Law, Pak Halim, and Director of the Universitas Pembangunan Nasional Veteran, if was here. And Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Yeah. So I think that I have a same perception with Christopher. It was very interesting sharing experience in the United States. Since that my brother also was there for more than 20 years, but since it's a pandemic COVID, so he cannot go to Indonesia. So yeah, but I have several time to go to Seattle, and this was very beautiful city. So with regard to the my presentation, I think same with the Christopher that I would like to share how that Indonesia law enforcement during the COVID-19 pandemic. Yeah, as a background, since that I think every country in the world also has the same difficulty, same struggling how to face the pandemic COVID. But in Indonesia, the presidents declared that in March 2020 that the outbreak of the coronavirus began in Indonesia. And until now, it's more than 1 year that the outbreak of the coronavirus disease had been confirmed over 210 countries, and it was infected more than 128 million people worldwide, and the number of deaths has reached around 2.8 million. So we can imagine that, I don't know, maybe it is how that the people in the world or country in the world has to work together in facing this pandemic COVID. And also Indonesia is the fourth country with the highest COVID-19 cases in Asia. And the overall amount of recorded confirmed cases until now is around 1.5 cases. And different than Christopher in the United States, I think Indonesia, we are a united country, and we don't recognize the federal country, but we have the decentralization. And I think every country also face quite confused, quite very not to decide whether we have to option to optimize the health health Medicare for the people or for economic. But since that the case become increased, so the government has implemented various policy. First of all is about the large-scale social restriction, or we can say that PSBB. It's slightly different than lockdown, but the government, the central government, give such kind of the discretion to the local government how to face the pandemic COVID-19 in their area. And several changes have been made to carry out important activities in this pandemic. And not only that, I think we can remember that at the beginning that the president, yes, what Prof. Jimli Asidiki mentioned, that at the time we were very try to find the best solution. But at the end, the government issued the government regulation in lieu, and got the and now got the promulgated from the Parliament with the law number 1/2020 on the how that we try to face the pandemic COVID from the financial policy and financial system stability in handling the COVID-19. And also actually that we have the several regulation like health quarantine, infectious disease, government regulation, and then presidential regulation, and also Ministry of Health regulation, and all what the government try to face that for the best of the Indonesian people. Even though that from the constitutional perspective, Prof. Jimli already mentioned, but I think we know that under our constitution, under the Article 28H, that every Indonesian people has to get good health and obtain medical care, and also under the Article 34 that how that people has also has to get the good health and also the public service facility. And with regard to that, in the area of the social protection, health and economic program, I think in my perspective that the government conduct very fast action by issue the policy about the cash transfer for workers whose income less than 5 million, valued 319.9 trillion rupiah for 50.7 workers. And also the government provide for unconditional cash transfer for value 33.5 trillion rupiah for 9 million beneficiaries. And also, we subsidize for the electricity for 1.9 million beneficiaries. And not only that, because we know the impact, especially to our small medium enterprise, and the government also subsidize for 7.4 trillion for 3 million small medium enterprise for the second batch. And also in the health sector, the government also subsidize for paramedics around 6.2 trillion rupiah. And in terms of the law enforcement and sanction applied during the COVID-19 pandemic, in our experience as well, that how the government, not only the central government, but also the local government, try to find the best solution. But right now that first at the first beginning, we applied the large-scale social restriction, and then after we see about the trend of the contagious of the coronavirus. And then we issued the another policy, what we call the limitation of micro-based community activities. And from January from January to February 2021, we also obliged that around 71.9 mandatory mask violation, in which 70.2 cases were imposed by social sanction, while the rest paid a fine. So I think this is the best option that the local government, especially, try to avoid, try to prevent the contagious of the coronavirus. And the amount of fines have been collected in total 6 billion, 10 million, 0.1 rupiah. And I think same with the what Christopher presentation that about the domestic violence. So globally, women, children, and the elderly will be the strongly vulnerable because they are the group of people that face or likely to face an increased risk of violence, abuse, or neglect, especially in the pandemic era and pandemic COVID-19. And we got the survey done by the National Commission on Violence Against Women that 34 service units have stated that there is an increase in case report during the pandemic. So if you can see that in 2019, it's only 1.4 thousand cases, but in 2020, you can see that there are 2,003.3 cases, and 60% from these cases is domestic violence. I think we can understand that because of the policy, economic policy, and then the health policy, we try to make it parallelly, but at the end, of course, that we have to, the government has to also to choose that the health, people healthy is very important. And the way forward that the Ministry of Women Empowerment and Child Protection cooperate with the UN Fund for Population Activities have taken several steps. First, about the protocols on complaint handling mechanism, protocol on assistance services, or also issued the health services and safe housing, like a shelter referral, and psychosocial services and legal consulting services and legal assistance. And same with the what the Christopher would like to share in terms of the court proceedings. I think that in terms of the law enforcement or the process of the law enforcement also got the impacted from the COVID-19 pandemic. And if you see that from the trial for civil, religious, military administration and state administration cases, we applied the e-court system. And according to the circular letter of Supreme Court, or SEMA, number 1, 2020 on guidelines for implementing tasks during the prevention period of the spread of COVID-19 in the Supreme Court and the judiciary institutions, trials of civil, religious, military, and state administrative cases during the COVID-19 pandemic shall be carried out online through the e-court system. And the e-court system itself is regulated through the Supreme Court Regulation number 1, 2019, Electronic Case and Trial Administration. That was before the COVID-19 emerged. And with regard to the trial for the criminal cases, trial for the criminal case are also held through teleconference. It is regulated through Supreme Court Regulation number 4, 2020, concerning the electronic administration and trial of criminal case in courts. To implement the trial electronically, the Supreme Court has collaborated with the Attorney General Office, the police of the and also the Ministry of Justice, Ministry of Law and Human Rights. I think this is the best solution that in terms doing the offline. I think since that quite many judges also impacted of the coronavirus, so I think this is the good solution for the Supreme Court to issue the e-court electronic court procedure. And how did the procedure happen? So if you see that in the blue line is about the e-court system. So at the beginning, is it from the at the beginning that the claimant shall register his case through the e-filing system, and then the claimant may pay for the down payment for the case trial case through the e-payment system. And the third, the court register will send notification to the parties ordering them to be present in the courtroom on the first day of trial. Hence, after that, the e-litigation systems begins. And if you see from the red line that the implementation of the e-litigation doesn't mean that there is no face-to-face trial at all, but rather to minimize the face-to-face process in court, which previously was usually carried out 15 times to only 3 times. This face-to-face meeting is at least conducted during the first trial, second trial, and verification of written evidence, like ordinary letters, authentic deeds, and privately signed deeds. And the first day of the trial will still be held face-to-face in the courtroom. And the judge will ask the plaintiff to submit 3 original documents, namely the power of attorney lawsuit and approval letter to carry out the trial electronically. Then, as stipulated as the Supreme Court Regulation number 1, 2016, mediation effort will be taken first within 30 days. If the mediation. So if the mediation process doesn't reach an agreement between the parties, the trial process will be continued face-to-face for the second time in the courtroom. And the judge will offer the defendant to continue the trial electronically by signing a willingness form. Then, if the defendant agrees to trial electronically, the trial will be temporarily postponed for the judge to compile and determine the trial schedule, and for the trial will be held by teleconference. It is important to note that during the trial by teleconference, all parties must be connected in real time. For example, like through the Zoom, and be able to obtain clear audio and visual information. And specifically for the written evidence examination, the trial must be held face-to-face in the courtroom, considering that the strength of this type evidence in civil case. A written evidence examination in litigation is carried out by a double check system, meaning that the examination is carried out in 2 stages, namely online examination and physical examination of the original document. Therefore, the parties are required to upload written evidence document which have been stamped through their e-court account. And then the parties are required to come to the court office with the original document to be submitted to the judges. And finally, the agenda of the announcement of the verdict or stipulation, and the parties don't need to come to the court. They can easily see the verdict or stipulation on the e-court account. And with regard to the electronic trial of the criminal case, the judge will determine whether the trial will be held online or offline. However, during the pandemic, it is almost certain that the trial will be held online as ordered by the Supreme Court. Before the electronic trials begin, the court registrar will check the readiness of the parties as well as the completeness of electronic equipment and report it to the judge. And then after everything is complete, the judge will start the trial electronically by teleconference, and technically the judge are present in the courtroom, but only judge, while the prosecutor and witnesses are present from the prosecutor's office. It means that they present in their own office. The defendant and the lawyer are present from detention centers or police station. So if the defendant is not detained, his testimony can be heard directly in court or by teleconference from the public prosecutor office or other places determined by the judges. So all in this case, all participants must be connected in real time, usually through Zoom, and be able to obtain clear audio and visual information. And every document submitted by the prosecutor, lawyer, and the defendant must be in PDF format, and must be sent to the email address of the court before it is read out through teleconference. And if the evidence submitted is in the room.
Excuse me, Ibu Diani.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt that. Just to remind you that you have for five more minutes. Thank you.
So I think if you see from the presentation that this is what the Indonesia still try to conduct the law enforcement even in the pandemic era, the pandemic COVID-19. And with regard to the social protection, law enforcement and social protection, we know that the Commission, the Eradication Corruption Commission, also play an important role in prevent the violation of the distribution of the social protection. They focus on the procurement of the food packages, and also our CSO, like Indonesia Corruption Watch, also try to raise the awareness of the people that the government has to really intense that the social protection has to be in the proper distribution. And in terms of the law enforcement of the vaccine, we have the several regulation, and I think until now that Indonesia still in progressing to shut the vaccine, and a new policy now, how we prevent the people to go to their hometown in order we don't want to have a same experience like in India. And this is the effort and policy that I hope that to be taken to handle COVID-19, that the various health regulation and protocol as a massive campaign on hand washing, and how that we applied the enforcing the health protocol, and we applied the PSBB, and also we also try to handle that the state revenue and also regional revenue also focus on the handling the COVID-19 and how we improve the healthcare services and providing for the vaccination, and how we adjust in terms of the implementation of the law enforcement, and also hope that the by the vaccine policy that we can more better and better in terms of the how to prevent the COVID-19. And the last for the recommendation, I suggest that the capacity building to support the implementation of the e-court and e-trial covering the online training for judges, court staff, and the public, including lawyers, is very important. And also, it has to be a sufficient allocation of funds to support for adjustment is very crucial, and the e-procurement mechanism to uphold transparent and accountable governance, and also how that we optimize the government internal supervisory apparatus across the various institutions to avoid the violation of the misuse of the distribution or anything, any kind of the supporting for the people. And public engagement is very important through open platform to ensure the good governance principle, and also cooperation and coordination among the line ministries, because we found that several ministries also has quite a silo decision, and I hope that it more increase their coordination. And the last one, how to ensure the fair distribution of vaccine to all citizens. I think that's a little bit that I try to share, that how the law enforcement in Indonesia during the pandemic COVID. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much, Ibu Diani, for the great presentation on the law enforcement during the pandemic in Indonesia. It was a great insight on the legal framework on the pandemic, on the COVID-19 pandemic, and also legal challenges to handling the pandemic. I am sure that all the attendees will like to the question and I didn't realize that I was muted. Thank you very much, Ibu Diani, for the great presentation on the law enforcement during the COVID-19 pandemic. It was a great insight on the legal framework and also legal challenges and the COVID-19 pandemics and how we handling the pandemic in Indonesia, and also give a perspective on how our legal proceeding adjusting itself to the pandemic situations. I'm really sorry that because of the time constraint that you need to speed up your presentation. I'm sure that we want to discuss this further in the Q&A in the debriefing session. Now we are moving to the next speaker. It should be the session for the associate professor Dr. Hartini Saripan, but since she is not joining us, she has not joined us because she has a funeral to attend, and we have to move on to the. We have to give the time to the next speaker, Professor Jaco Barquisen from University of Limpopo, Polokwane, South Africa. Hopefully that Associate Professor Dr. Hartini will be able to join us soon after Professor Jaco Barquisen deliver his presentation. Professor Jaco Barquisen, time is yours to deliver your presentation. Your time is 25 minutes. Thank you so much.
Salam, everyone. I hope you can hear me. Good morning. I'm so glad to see some of my colleagues from Indonesia. I've been missing you guys. Can't travel, as we all know, so that's been problematic. But I'd like to share my screen, and then we can get to the crux of the situation. So what I called my presentation is law enforcement in the pandemic COVID-19 era, a case study how everything can go wrong. South Africa. So just as I always say when I do a presentation here in Indonesia, victim rights is human rights. Violation of any human rights or victim rights is a crime. And we should remember, trying to protect people by violating their rights, especially by police persons, it's still a crime and a violation. Just because the police does that doesn't make it correct. So here is South Africa. So here's South Africa. We're at the southern point of Africa, for those who don't know. On the right, we have, on the right, we have Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Botswana, and Namibia. This will be important for later on. So just a brief history of South Africa, or the southern part of Africa. It was colonized by the Dutch in 1652. Then there was a war, then it was colonized by the British. Then in 1961, the white minority apartheid government took over and started also in full force apartheid in 1961. We became a full constitutional democracy in 1994 with what is called the world's best constitution. We're also part of the BRICS group. So a brief history of law enforcement in South Africa. So because we were colonized by the Dutch, there was something called the Dutch Watch that worked as a sort of police service in the Cape Colony. Then in 1913, after the unionization of South Africa, so just what that meant was there were 4 provinces or 4 different republics that were then unionized in what is South Africa, or the Union of South Africa. These republics became provinces over a greater union of South Africa. So when that happened, there was something called the South African police that also happened to enforce all policing over all these provinces. Then, unfortunately, as we said, there was a rise in conservatism. White minority group rose in power. And then in 1958, which is a very important day, the Police Act number 7 of 1958 broadened the mission of the South African police beyond conventional policing functions. So this was the proto-apartheid state and apartheid police. So the South African police became the South African police force. This force could also enforce arrest political dissidents, could keep you in detention without letting anyone, any legal person know. People disappeared. There was something extrajudicial police killings. So you have to remember this. This is sort of ingrained, this machismo of the police, that they could do anything. Then in 1994, there was a rise of democracy. Nelson Mandela. 1995, we changed the police to the South African Police Service. So the police were demilitarized. There was a human rights ethos. Now, unfortunately, 2009, because of that time's commissioner of police, they remilitarized the police, especially the commissioner that would go on national TV and tell the police to shoot to kill. Now, South Africa does not have a death penalty. We abolished the death penalty in 1994 because it was used in such a political way that the idea of the state having rights to kill someone, we didn't like that idea, so we took it away. But then we had now the commissioner of police telling the police to shoot to kill. So now we get to COVID. We have 5 lockdown levels. Lockdown 5 is a full country lockdown. This happened on 26 March 2020. It was supposed to be just for 35 days. It was done under what is called the State of Disaster Act. Now, it's not a state of emergency. So with the State of Disaster Act, you don't have so much parliamentary oversight as a state of emergency. So the state of disaster, unlike a state of emergency that only can last for a couple of weeks and then it has to end, the State of Disaster Act, as it's written currently, every month, the National Corona Command Council extends it without super parliamentary oversight. So we had 5, like I said, 5 levels of lockdown. It was extremely, level 5 was extreme. dramatic measures required to contain the spread of the virus. So there was a liquor ban, no sale, dispensing, distribution, or transportation, except for hand sanitizer, disinfectant. There was no special events or liquor licenses, no restaurants. Tobacco was banned for some reason. And then we had a curfew from 8 p.m. till 5 p.m. With the exception, it's only essential and permitted services, or if you had a security or a medical emergency. So the army, the South African National Defence Force, were deployed with the South African Police Service. However, this is when everything went wrong. About the 11th or the 12th of April, the army murdered a guy called Collins Khoza. Now, Collins Khoza was in his own home or in his own house's garden drinking beer. So now remember, the police and the army were patrolling this area together. So the army went in, saw him drinking beer. They only heard alcohol is illegal. So they assumed that if you have alcohol, you're breaking the law. They went in and illegally entered this guy's premises and they beat him to death. The SAPs, the South African Police, assisted the army by not protecting Collins Khoza. Then when we went into lockdown level 3 or 4, there was a child called Nathan Julius with Down syndrome. So he left his house to go buy something down the road, and 3 police officers shot him to death. Their excuse in the beginning was that they heard there was some sort of commotion. They told the kid to stop. This kid didn't stop, but it seems that was a big cover-up. So this is a problem, that we have excessive police reactions during a lockdown. Why does this happen? Well, there is this extreme mixed messages from government and the Minister of Police. By the way, this minister we currently have, the Minister of Police, it was the previous commissioner that remilitarized the police. Another side note, he was removed as commissioner because of allegations of corruption, but now he's the Minister of Police. So just let that stew in your head. Then there's also inadequate training of ordinary South African police service members in general, but specifically so during a pandemic and a natural disaster. The training is horrendous. It's non-existent. Now, what was the consequences of the lockdown and this ineffective law enforcement? 342,000 people have been arrested. So that means it's nearly 1/3 of a million of people in South Africa have been arrested and face criminal records. Our National Prosecuting Agency will never be able to prosecute this amount of people that are arrested. And some of these arrests is so egregiously wrong that it just breaks your brain. But what the police did, which is also insidious. So when they stop someone and you don't have you cannot immediately prove that you have an emergency, they would arrest you and say, no, they're going to charge you for breaking lockdown regulations, blah, blah, blah. But you can pay admission of guilt fine. Then we won't take you to the police station and whatever. But what the police then do not inform the South African public is the moment you pay that admission of guilt fine, you're actually admitting to breaking the law and you have a criminal record. So the moment you have a criminal record, we all know it's difficult, especially if you go for a new job, background checks, if you want to travel the world, passports and visas. Also, as was spoken about by other presenters. There's been an increase in GBV cases, gender-based violence in South Africa. Pre-lockdown was a huge problem. Now, during lockdown, it has increased even more. And we can all think about why people are stuck in houses with their abusers. There's no way to get out of the house, especially if you are locked down from 8 at night till 5 in the morning. And as the media has reported, some people with medical emergencies still get stopped by the police and arrested. I'm not joking. This is happening because, again, ineffective law enforcement training. On a side note, the Independent Police Investigation Directorate is currently investigating 700 cases of police criminality. This ranges from taking bribes up to murder, sexual assault, torture in police detainment centers. So that is a lot of cases of police criminality. Then just to further go on, so with the tobacco ban, South Africa lost 6 billion rands in just tax losses. Excise duty losses is 13 billion. That's about $1 billion. And then 300,000 job losses. With the alcohol ban and prohibition, 36.6 billion in retail sales, 200,000 jobs and investment freezes. And this was enforced by the police. They made sure that you couldn't buy cigarettes, you couldn't buy alcohol. Now, the problem with these two prohibitions, we'll talk about the long-term effects, but the short-term effects, people were arrested for having cigarettes. People were detained for smoking. Someone got killed for drinking a beer in his own house. And I mean, this is not how we protect people from a virus, by killing them for drinking a beer. So the question is the South African Police Service, but the problem is because of the legacy of apartheid and how the police were used, there's a lack of trust in SAPS already. And especially because we already have high crime rates due to ineffective policing and corrupt practices. Now, during the lockdown, we've seen the lack of trust in SAPS have actually increased more. Then we have a rise of police state tendency, by the words of the minister and high-ranking officials. They're like, we will arrest you. We are your custodians. Very paternalistic towards the population. The whole, who do you think you are? I'm a policeman type of attitude. And there's also been an increase of force, sometimes fatal, when the police are dealing with citizens. And what we also found was that the police became a lot more inward looking and not outward looking. So more towards crimes committed by people in South Africa, not the potential of crimes coming from cross-border to South Africa, which later might become a huge problem for South Africa. What we also saw is there's a disproportionate use of force in poorer areas, especially poorer Black areas in South Africa. You'll have social media videos where people are protesting and the police will just use normal force. And then in more poorer areas, they will use disproportional amounts of force to disperse crowds, shoot tear gas, rubber bullets, use beatings, as in the case of Collins Khoza, Nathaniel Julius. And another unintended consequence of this alcohol and tobacco ban was the rise of the black market. we already had a black market in South Africa, but it now has risen a lot, which is also the increase of organized crime. And then there is the threat of ISIL Daesh in Mozambique. I'll speak about it. This here is Mozambique, here is South Africa. Then we have money flows to politicians and police. And some of these lockdown levels, there was now rule violations of our Bill of Rights and Constitution, but the government is appealing. Some of the things on privacy, bodily and psychological integrity, the right to practice trade. So it has been taken up. The high courts have ruled it unconstitutional, certain of these lockdown regulations. The government has appealed it. I think it's now at the Supreme Court of Appeal, or it has moved from there, and then it will end up in our highest court, which is the Constitutional Court. So remember I talked about Daesh. So on the 24th of March, ISIL linked terror group attacked Palma in Mozambique. That is extremely close to the South African border with Mozambique. Now, as we know, there's a link between organized criminal groups and terror groups. Terror groups might sell alcohol or tobacco to organized groups, and these groups give the money, and the terrorist group buy weapons. So that link between the organized and terror groups is not so much a worry, it seems, for South Africa at the moment, even though we know the black market has increased. You can buy illegal cigarettes coming from Mozambique if you really look for it. So what should be done? Well, all of us, especially living through lockdowns and pandemics, there should be a common sense enforcement and policing. Just another example from South Africa. Remember the curfew from 8 till 5. I think it's now from 10 till 4. So 2 months ago, there was this guy, and this made national headlines. There was this guy in Johannesburg. He had a 1-month-old baby. The baby didn't want to drink milk. He lives 2 or 3 blocks away from the hospital. So he gets in his car, drives to the emergency pharmacy, buys milk, gets medicine, drives back home. He's now breaking curfew law. He gets pulled over. He shows his receipt. He shows his the milk for the baby. He phones his wife to come out and just show the police, and the police still arrest him. There is now a civil case against the police for this violation because they didn't use common sense. And the problem with the police being sued, it's not like it is the police that pays. In the long run, it's the taxpayer, it's me, it's anyone in South Africa that pays tax, that our tax money then goes to fix the problems the police created. Then the police should focus more on gender-based violence. I sometimes consult for local government on gender-based violence, or the provincial government here in Limpopo. And what was shocking for me to discover is a lot of police people and state departments, policing, security services, social services, did not realize that South Africa has something called the South African Victim Rights Charter, which is a minimum level of legal protection offered to victims of crime, that the police, social development, none of them knew that is a problem. We have very good human rights and victim rights laws in South Africa, but government that implemented, that passed this through parliament, that signed this into law, does not know that they did that. So you have this disconnect between what Parliament did and what the state actually knows, which is the weirdest disconnect and a very dangerous disconnect. We should re-demilitarize police. This idea that a policeman is like John Wayne or the law, I am the law, is something like that. No, you are a servant of the people. You're the servant of the constitutional order of South Africa. You are there to protect any person in the boundaries of South Africa, and you're there to enforce the law, but you're also there to protect the people, not hurt the people. We need better training in crowd control, and we need police officers to know the law they enforce. They do not need to spend so many times on law in the police training college, which is weird. Seeing as you're a law enforcement officer, you're supposed to know what laws you enforce.
Excuse me, Professor Jeko,
yes,
you have 5 more minutes. Thank you.
I'm nearly finished. Then there should be more focus on eliminating corruption from South African government, SAPs, South African government departments. So yeah, this is how things went horribly wrong. 700 cases of police criminality being investigated. Yeah, thank you very much. I'll wait for questions.
Thank you very much, Professor Jeko, for the great presentation on how South Australia enforced the law during the pandemic. Well, I must say that given how many people have been arrested and how the level of police criminality in your country, that during the restriction measure, I must say that the law in South Australia is quite harsh. Well, to all participants, we will have the opportunity to discuss Professor Jeko's presentation later in the debriefing sessions. We are now moving on to the last but not least presentation by Associate Professor Dr. Hartini Saripan, the Dean of Faculty of Law from University Technology Mara, Malaysia. She will give a presentation with a topic on how we enforce the rules relating to safety and movement control during the pandemic. Professor Hartini, since you have just joined us on behalf of the committee, I would like to welcome you to this conference. And now the time is yours. You have 25 minutes to present your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Panki Hendra. First of all, I would like to thank the Rector and the Dean of the Faculty of Law, UPN Vijay, for inviting me to speak today. And I think I would like to begin my presentation by congratulating the Faculty of Law, UPN Vijay. Congratulations on your 21 anniversary. And I think we hope that the good relationships between the Faculty of Law, UITM, and the Faculty of Law, UPN Vijay would continue to flourish for many years ahead. And today, I think I am going to share with you the Malaysian experience on basically the legal responses, developments, and some takeaways in navigating these new norms contributing by the pandemic. So let me just share my slides. Okay. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is what I'm going to talk about for the next 25 minutes. This is on the legal responses by the Malaysian government, and to what extent we have managed to enforce the law. And my apologies that I have to join quite late because I have a funeral to attend just now. And I listened to Professor Jacko's presentation just now towards the end of the presentation, and I am very much interested in how South Africa has actually enforced their law. And now it's my turn to share the Malaysian experience and how we in Malaysia has actually responded to the pandemic. Right, let me begin with sharing with you the situation of COVID-19 in Malaysia. If you look at this chart, you can actually see the increase of the number of cases from 9th April to yesterday. I think yesterday was the highest, 2,800 cases per day. So new COVID-19 infections had actually jumped to more than 2,500 cases per day, raising the country's total cases of more than 380,000 cases with I think more than 300 active clusters. In fact, the current situation is very is worse than the first movement control order last year. And there are 4 states that are impacted very badly, including Selangor, where UiTM is stated. And at the global landscape, I'm sure all of you are aware, the report by WHO stated that there have been more than 140 million confirmed cases of COVID-19 with more than 3 million death cases. So this is of 22nd April, that was yesterday. Now the question is, the situation is worrying. How does Malaysia respond to the pandemic? I think this is not just Malaysia. It happened and it occurred to almost all parts of the world. To effectively control the pandemic, the Malaysian government has implemented different movement control order levels depending on the risk, ranging from high risk to low risk areas. And up to today, there are at least 5 phases of MCO. The first MCO, the first time that was very shocking for all of us, it was last year. We could remember very clearly on 18th of March 2020, and some of us, some of the Malaysian citizens, they actually celebrated the first anniversary on 18th of March this year. And at that time, we were on the second MCO. Sorry, we were just had our second MCO that was on phase 6. The second movement control order was 13 January to 4th March this year. So as early as January, we have had the second wave of movement control order. And if you look at these phases, there are several levels of control order ranging from CMCO is conditional movement or recovery movement, where these levels of control order determine the strictness, the level of strictness of the SOPs. Now, ladies and gentlemen, with the announcement of the MCO to curb the spread of the pandemic was actually made by the Prime Minister pursuant to the Prevention and Control of Infectious Disease Act 1988 and the Police Act 1987. And following this announcement, the Prevention and Control of Infectious Disease Declaration of Infected Local Area Order 2020 was issued on 16 March 2020. And according to Section 11 of the Prevention and Control of Infectious Disease 1988, states that the minister declared all states and federal territories in Malaysia to be infected areas. So with this declaration last year, that was the beginning of new norms in Malaysia. And together with this announcement, the laws also provide, or the law also provides several penalty and punishment in order to show the government commitment in ensuring the enforcement, the proper enforcement of the law. If I may actually share with you some of the examples of offenses that have been introduced since last year. I think starting August 1st, 2020, the wearing of face masks was made compulsory and in crowded places, and such a mandatory requirement is made by virtue of the Prevention and Control of Infectious Disease Act 1988. And if we are found liable for not wearing masks, we can actually be made liable up to 1,000 fine under the Act. And another example of the penalty imposed is the application of My Sejahtera. Now, My Sejahtera is an app developed by the government to assist in managing the COVID-19 outbreaks, and it allows users to perform health self-assessment on themselves and their families. And with this self-assessment, it allows the ministry to monitor users' health condition and to take immediate action whenever the treatment is required. So in this context, the apps was developed to support the implementation of the Prevention and Control of Infectious Disease Act 1988. And it provides that if we give false information, it is an offense under Section 22 of the same Act, as well as Section 233 of the Communication and Multimedia Act 1998. Now, these are some of the highlights of the control order. If you look at the list, and I'm sure these are also the standard operating procedures in most of the control orders around the world. That includes the operation, the continuous operation of businesses that provides essential services, including water, electricity, transportation, health, pharmacy, and many more. And then partial lockdown, which is not constituted as a military lockdown. So there is no exactly curfew imposed, but the public is highly encouraged to stay at home and limit leaving their home unless it is absolutely necessary. And then we also have restrictions on all public movements and mass gatherings. And I think this is very important, where all forms of public gatherings are banned. And this also includes the imposition of travel bans, that borders are closed. That's why, we have innovated the new way of engaging our international partners. And one of the examples is by having this virtual conference like what we are doing today. And then the fifth one is the temporary closure of schools, government, and private premises. And the temporary closure of these premises actually depends on the level and severity of the situation. Of course, with the advice by the Security Council. For example, currently we are no longer on movement control order or absolute movement control order. We are on conditional movement control order. So some schools are actually open with strict standard operating procedure. So the highlights of the control order, I would say, depends. The strictness is depends on the levels of risk that will be assessed by the Security Council. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we have actually seen and acknowledged how COVID-19 has actually impacted all of us. And when we talk about the impact, the Malaysian government has actually taken a step last year in introducing a specific act. This is temporary measures to reduce the impact of COVID-19. The name of the act is Temporary Measures for Reducing the Impact of Coronavirus Disease 2020. You know, there's a typo there, 2020. The act came into force on 23rd October 2020 for 2 years, subject to a potential extension by the Prime Minister if it is required. So this is a specific act initiated by the government to provide temporary relief for stakeholders that are impacted during the pandemic period. Now, speaking about the Act comprises 19 parts, and the temporary measures are divided into 3 categories. The first one is to address the inability to perform contractual obligations. During the pandemic, even now, we have seen so many instances where contracts have not been successfully performed, or they are forced not to perform due to control order or movement control order or very strict standard operating procedure. So the Act has actually provided the remedy to remedy the situation. And according to the Act, Section 7 provides that if any party is unable to perform any contractual obligations under the contract specified in the schedule, then the non-defaulting party to the contract or the aggrieved party cannot exercise their rights under the contract. So the exercise of rights is pending, and the specific contracts or the specific categories mentioned by the Act or stated by the Act includes contracts relating to construction, professional services contract, event contract. We are also talking about religious pilgrimage related contract and contract by a tourism enterprise. And this Act also provides that it operates retrospectively from 18 March 2020 until 31st December 2020 last year. And it also being interpreted that if the contract has already been terminated, or any deposit or performance bond forfeited, any damages received, any judgment has been actually granted or awarded between 18 March and the date of publication, that is 23rd October, then such termination would be considered valid. That means this is a proviso that, according to some writers, they have actually commented and claims that these provisos has actually watered down the intention of the Act to provide remedy and temporary measures to stakeholders who are impacted. Now, the second category is the modification to Malaysian legislation. This Act has actually modified 16 pieces of legislations including Limitation Act, Insolvency Act, Hire Purchase Act, Consumer Protection Act, Distress Act, and many more. There are 16 altogether. And if I can give you one example, and I think this is very relevant, particularly to all citizens, taking into account that COVID-19 has actually given an impact, particularly on economy. The Insolvency Act 1967, the Insolvency Act is one of the legislations that was modified. So this act has been modified, and it is stated that during the period of the operation, from the date of publication of the COVID Act, that is 23rd of October, up to 31st of August 2021, a creditor shall not be entitled to present a bankruptcy petition against a debtor unless the amount of the debt owing by the debtor to the petitioning creditor is more than 100,000. This is actually an increase from the current threshold that is 50,000. And I think the modification to the Insolvency Act to provide some temporary measure with respect to the petition of bankruptcy is very, I would say, is very timely, because there are so many citizens that are financially impacted. So I think this is a very timely and very welcome by all of us Malaysians. And the next one is addressing the inability to perform statutory duties or obligations or to conduct statutory meetings. The Act also states that during the operation of this Act, the COVID-19 Act, Section 59 empowers the minister with the responsibility to publish an order. If let's say the minister is of the opinion that during period between 18 March to 9 June 2020, it was not possible to convene any meeting in a manner that is provided in the Act, or if it was due to the measures prescribed by the Prevention and Control of Infectious Diseases Act 1988, then whatever way that the minister feels suitable would be actually deemed valid. So it is again the intervention by the government to make sure that things are going conducted even though we are in the period of control order. Now, ladies and gentlemen, another milestone of our journey in Malaysia when we talk about the pandemic and how the Malaysian government responded to that is the proclamation of emergency. And I think this has been the media coverage, this has been in the media coverage worldwide, where on 12 January 2021, our King has actually declared emergency, and this has been followed by the Prime Minister's announcement on the reimposition of MCO on 6 states and federal territories from 13 January 2021. So this was actually the second wave of movement, absolute movement control order. The only difference is that the first wave involved all states in Malaysia, but this one, it involves 6 states and federal territories. So only certain states that are affected very badly will announce MCO. But having said that, the fact that the numbers were rising, and according to our Prime Minister, it has actually not only impacted the public health, but also it has become a major threat to the economic life of the people. And I think that was the basis of the proclamation of emergency. So this proclamation of emergency was made under the federal constitution, particularly Article 150, that gives that provides, if the king is satisfied that a grave emergency exists whereby the security or the economic life or public order in the federation is threatened, then he may issue a proclamation of
Excuse me
emergency.
to interrupt.
Yeah.
Dr. Hartini, you have just to remind me that you have 5 more minutes. Thank you.
Okay, all right. So during this, so the emergency proclamation was made under this act, and during this emergency period, there was no actually military coup, and the emergency was solely based on public health. And there are so many ordinances which was promulgated, taking into account that the parliament and state legislative assemblies are not sitting. So Article 150 also provides that the king may promulgate ordinances, and one of the ordinances is to increase fine up to 10,000 for an individual, and companies up to 50,000. So this is quite harsh. Now, what are the challenges and what are the lessons learned from the legal initiatives, the legal responses by the government? Now, some of the takeaways and lessons learned for us to continue navigating the future and to coexist with these unseen enemy is the rule of law in fighting COVID-19 pandemic. Now, it is very important to make sure that the enforcement officer upholds the importance of upholding the rule of law, because everybody is equal in front of the law. Some has actually criticized and commented that there are double standard in the enforcement of the law, and the government is taking that very, very seriously. So the issue of the upholding the rule of law is very important. Now, another challenge and also takeaway for us is how the enforcement officer transform and reimagine the way they police in a time of pandemic. And I think I have actually made reference to certain work in the US and in the UK, and they have actually refer to what they call a patchwork approach. And this patchwork approach seems to be workable because it is a patchwork to remedy depending on the situation of the civilians, of the citizens. And I think during in a time of pandemic, what is important for the enforcement officer to understand the law, that is number one, and to understand their role. Instrumentally, they are there to enforce the law, but I think in a time of pandemic, there's a shift of instrumental role where they have to educate citizens to understand the law. And another challenge is to strike a balance between the stakeholders. And I think despite the fact that the government has introduced our COVID Act, the Temporary Measures Act, there are comments and feedbacks where the act was introduced a little later, too little too late, some say. And the provisos in the act has to a certain extent watered down the intention of the act. It has actually diluted the intention of the act. And of course, the last one is self-regulation. I'm sure everybody acknowledges this. We can have the perfect law, we can have the most beautiful piece of legislation, but I think to fight this self-regulation of civil society is very important. So the maturity of the society to understand that we wear masks not because we don't want to be punished, we wear masks because we want to be healthy. we scan the apps not because we don't want to get penalty, but we scan that because we want the ministry to be with us, and to take care of us, and we want to take care of each other. And I think I'm very proud to share some of the pictures. They're not mine. I acknowledge Google image for this, but if you could see how beautiful this picture tells us that how the instrumental role of the enforcement officer has been reimagined and transformed from strictly enforce the law, talking about arresting, imposing penalties, to educating society and assisting the society. So I think this should be the spirit of all enforcement officer in all jurisdiction. And if all of us have this, then we can actually craft a better future for all of us, despite the fact that we are going to coexist with this invisible enemy. With that, thank you so much, Dr. Hendra. And I welcome any questions from the floor. Thank you. I stop share. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Associate Professor Hartini, for the interesting presentation and for the great presentations. And to me, it looks like Malaysia are following different approach to the previous presenter to the approach of South Africa. Associate Professor Hartini has given us some lights on the way Malaysia handling the pandemic and the milestone that has been achieved and the huge impact of the pandemic to the Malaysian economy. Well, I must say that the Malaysian handling to the pandemic is a bit more few steps forwards compared to the other countries in the regions, with some innovation in handling the pandemic. We know from the media regarding the success story of Malaysia in controlling the pandemic that Malaysia is handling the pandemic is a bit much better compared to several other ASEAN countries. And now it's the time for the briefing that will give all of us have a great opportunity for a question and answers. And you may ask question either to a specific speaker or to all speakers. And I will now open the floor to ask question. Please state your name and affiliations. Thank you.
Saya M. Arafah Sinjar.
Silakan. Go ahead, Mr. Arafah.
Right now?
Yes.
Okay, dear ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, and especially our rector, our dean, Mr. Haji Salim, and all of professor speakers. Thank you very much. Talk about the COVID-19 concerning with the ruler or with the constitution. And in fact, this is big ordeal or big temptation for all the people in the world, especially in Indonesia, also in India, America, Serikat, and so on. In fact, why we have to have a rule, why we have to enforce our regulation or constitution, I think we agree that the aim or destination of them, especially, for example, how to make 3M, yeah, washing our hand, make like this, masker, lockdown, and vaccination. I think that's all the aim for how to avoid the destruction of our health. Yeah, we agree that we avoid the destruction of economic life, education, and social activity, and so on. That's why we have to enforce rule. But ladies and gentlemen and speakers, and we have to realize, because I see from the ontology of the COVID itself, the existence of itself, yeah. Not all people in the world, especially in Indonesia, not all in Indonesia believe, but there is COVID. But from us, from our campus, academic, and so on, we believe it because we are from scientific group. Yeah, we know that COVID is like crown. Yeah, and virus very dangerous, and disease so dangerous. That's from us, from the people, but from uneducated level. Yeah, where their mind they influenced by primitive, maybe by religious, by intuition, and from their very low knowledge. That's why there is a violation, what we say, and there is they don't want to obey the law because their knowledge. So what is the action of the, especially for our laws or rulers, in the middle of the many kinds of belief, many kinds of uneducated, and many something or because this is, I think,
Excuse me.
I want to ask, especially for more of them, like Professor Jimlia Siddiq, and maybe uh, speakers, or they can answer my question. I think that's all. Sekian, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Excuse me, Pak Rafa, could you please specify your specific question? What are the rules that we can improve? What are the rules that we can improve?
Yeah,
to handle
improve
the
our enforce a law in the middle. I mean, in many kinds of the belief, like in Indonesia, concerning with the concept of the existence of COVID itself.
Okay. I think all the speaker can. All the speaker can give deliver can answer the question from Mr. Arafa. Given that many more disbelief to the pandemic and what we need to be done to handling the pandemic. I give the time to all speakers to answer the question. Thank you. Yep, go ahead, Mr. Jacko.
I would say consistency in communication. We need to, especially governments, need to be consistent in their communication. This is a pandemic. This is what you should do. Just keep on enforcing the message. Do this. And take into consideration, the government should also take into consideration that people are fearful. I mean, people are dying. So to show some compassion as well. The thing is, we enforce the laws, but we also have to be common sense. We have to use common sense when we enforce the law. Like you said, some people are not as educated as the group sitting here in Zoom. They don't maybe have the capacity to understand why certain things need to be done. So it's up to the government to educate the people as simply and as effectively. Because if you don't do that, then you'll have people believing conspiracy theories, thinking that this is now the end of the world. You need a compassionate communication about what's going on. If you don't do that, the rise in conspiracy, people resisting the law will continue. But you also need law enforcement to understand that they're dealing with people that are panicked. You hear about cases of families being wiped out by the virus. So people are fearful. And then especially in South Africa, where people are already fearful of the police and don't trust the police already, so it's a double thing. So consistent, compassionate communication. That is, I think, the most important thing. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Jacko. Now we go to Mr. Kessen. Mr. Kessen, do you have opinion on this?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just follow up on what Professor Jacko said. By the way, thank you, Professor Jacko, for making me feel better about America with the even more horrible stories about South Africa. I really didn't know. I mean, this has been fascinating for me as well. But yeah, I think, the other thing is, to add on to that, is we also have to address the responsibility of how this information is being spread, whether it's through our politics, whether it's companies spreading this disinformation for profit, or whether it's politicians spreading it for political gain. I think there needs, how do we address this disinformation campaign that was mentioned? Now we've moved from the phase of people disbelieving in the COVID to people being fearful of the vaccine. And how do we educate? And again, that's not this. Again, I think it is distrust from the law enforcement perspective, but it's got to be like a holistic approach. How do we? If they don't trust the police just going out and handcuffing them and putting a needle in their arm isn't going to create more trust. They need to have a holistic approach to education. So I don't know if that's a substantive answer or not, but yeah, that's my opinion.
Yes. Thank you, Prof. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kesan. Maybe now Ibu Diani, do you have something to add?
Okay, thank you, Pak Sinjar.
Iya, kasih, Pak.
So I think you know that in Indonesia that for me that there are several approaches that we apply. First, we have so many regulation, but how to ensure that the people aware about that? So
that's right.
The socialization and also communication that according to Prof. Jacko, I agree with that. How to build the communication that according to the situation, according to maybe to the uneducated people, maybe they can give such kind of the example. And second one about cultural approaches. I think we are in Indonesia, we are so many tribes, and how that we can use the cultural approaches. First, we can involving the adat leader,
yes,
the colleague from the civil society, from the universities. I think that's also the role of the local government. And the second one, religious approach. I think it's important as well, like in the vaccine, how that now the government approach the Islamic organization to ensure that the shut the vaccine in the first month is not
halal.
Halal. Is halal.
It's halal.
With many kinds of the explanation, and I think if we can share this with the continually, hopefully that people can aware of that. And the last one, the campaign, public campaign is very important. I know that the government seems that so exhausted because sometimes that the trend is decrease and then increase again. Yeah, but I think the government should not exhausted with this one, but has to confirm that how to raise the awareness is very important. And if it's not working well, so come to the law enforcement. But the law enforcement itself, of course, is not only to put in jail because there will be a new problem again. Yeah, because I think we know that the condition in the jail also not and it also depend on the our regulation as well. And the last is about the transparency that, and accountability of the process, any kind of process, especially for the vaccine, because like Professor Jacob mentioned that there was some opinion about the conspiracy theory. So I think this is the role of the government and also the other stakeholder to together, yeah, together along together to fight the pandemic coronavirus in Indonesia. Thank you.
Thank you, Budiani.
Okay, now Associate Professor Hartini, you may want to add something.
All right. Thank you, Doctor. And I think being the last is great because most of the points have been covered by my co-speakers. But I would just, I agree with all of that. Especially we are talking about the law enforcement in Malaysia and how we want to make sure that whatever the government initiative has been actually been effectively enforced. Communication is I would say the goddess, and not just to communicate accurately. And I think in that respect, one of the ordinances that have just recently been promulgated is the ordinance pertaining to fake news. And that initiative is very in line with what I think Christopher mentioned that just now. So the accuracy of communication is very, very important. But another thing that I would like to also add, something that we cannot take it very lightly is the role of media. And I think media plays an important role, not just to make sure that whatever initiatives have been communicated well to the society at large, but more importantly, to strike a balance between fearing the punishment, fearing these legal enforcers, and to fear of our own health. And I think in a long run, that would actually create a culture, as what Ibu Diani mentioned just now. Culture plays an important role, but culture is not an overnight thing. We have to create that culture, and that can actually be nurtured with the help of media. And I think we cannot underestimate the power of social media, for example, not just the mainstream media. And I think one of the platforms and MOs of the government is to make use of social media, social influencers, to disseminate accurate information, including, the fearful of vaccination. And the importance of having communication via media, I think, cannot be underestimated. Coming from a background of a country with diverse race and religion, I think, if I can remember correctly, Prof. Arafat, just now you have also mentioned about the fact that the country has, different religion background. I am personally view that when it comes to the issue of public pandemic, because this evil, they don't know whether you are Muslim or non-Muslim or poor or rich, and that philosophy and understanding needs to be communicated and cultured and educated, to all public at large. And as I mentioned in my presentation just now, law enforcement officer could actually play a very influential role in transforming their instrumental role from being a public officer that arrests or provide or impose penalty to somebody that would educate and culture and nurture this new culture that we want to build. And I think we are not talking about a temporary measure. At the moment, we are talking about a long-term and sustainable measure. And only when everybody in that country realizes the importance of taking care of ourselves, not just because of the punishment that should come, you know, from our heart, and understand why it is very, very important. I think only then we are talking about the most effective way to enforce whatever initiatives and responses. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hartini.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hartini. It is interesting to know that the holistic approach that are suggested by all the speakers, that is particularly important to battle hoax surrounding the COVID, because there are so many people that did not believe that the COVID is real. It is also interesting to know that in handling the COVID, we need the involvement from the all stakeholders that Ibu Hartini, Dr. Hartini, and Dr. Dayani has mentioned. Also, Prof. Jeko and Mr. Kesan has mentioned. We need to involve all stakeholders, including even the adult leaders, media, etc. Also, interesting to know about the other initiatives that are proposed by the speakers. Now we are moving to the. I open up again for the next question. So maybe anyone wants to ask question.
From Jimli Asidik, no answer.
I'm not sure Prof. Jimli Asidik is still in the room. Yeah, he's not in the room.
I actually have a philosophical questions here.
Yes, please.
I'm not really sure who this addressing to. Maybe it's actually firstly addressed to Prof. Jimli, but feel free to answer these questions. I've been watching, well, actually, these questions was inspired because recently I just finished a serial Netflix. It is called The Crown. In one of the discussions between the Queen Elizabeth and the firm, it is stating that democracy is a disarray. Democracy has so many clutters, conflict, as also has been explained by Dr. Kaysen in the seminars. I wonder what's actually, especially in this era of pandemic, we have so many times to reflect, to take a step back and to muse how we have gone by. What do you think, distinguished speaker, seen the ideal democracy? Do you think it should come with the more conflict is a good democracy, like especially in this especially in this era of pandemic? How actually the law have a role? If Professor Ghibli said the dictatorship is some kind of certainty in this uncertain era, but I still believe in the role of law itself. So how we manage the law to anticipate these conditions, to anticipate these clutters, these conflicts, these multi-interpretations in democracy. What must come first? Is it the certainty of law, or is it the justice? Or maybe they are hand in hand together. So yeah, I don't know where to address these questions. Sorry if it is a bit classical, philosophical, but maybe it could be started with the seller of the democracy from America, of course, because we believe America has been a good seller for this, what I can say, yeah, the illusions of democracy. If I can say.
Thank you, Ibu Aurora. You may want to add directly, Mr. Kesson.
Well, and I'd like other people to follow up too, because
Yeah.
I mean, we're all coming from different
Yes.
types of democracies,
Yes.
and of course,
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm going to misquote Winston Churchill from the UK, saying we've tried all forms of government. Democracy is the worst, except everything else. You know, it's a famous quote. And I think, yeah, it really lays bare the difficulties of democracy, you know, but it also, you know, the COVID has really has made everyone examine their government system. You know, we look at all the protections of democracy, but that's also been a weakness during COVID. You know, the freedoms that we allow, the free speech, as we just discussed in the last session about misinformation. You know, we pride ourselves in our ability to have discourse, free discourse, yet that same free discourse is given this platform for misinformation about vaccines, about the hoax of COVID, etc. So I'm not going to have a good answer, except to say that it's made everything more transparent. I think that people see the problems with democracy, the problems with dictatorship in North Korea, in China, even in Singapore, which is don't forget, is a dictatorship. We all love it, but yeah, it's still a dictatorship, and all the problems they've had there. And then it brings forth the racism. I mean, I didn't address that in my presentation, but we've had to. It's really amplified our racial divides. And is America truly a democracy? Because people are underrepresented, especially minorities and people of color. And so, yeah, all I can say is that this pandemic has made us really examine those forms of government, and it's made it examine our laws. And like Dr. Siddiqui and Dr. Diana, you know, it helps us examine our Constitution too, and our procedural laws, and how those affect different populations, different economic stratus, and you know, hopefully we'll come out of this. And I think it was funny because Justice Asadiki said, "This has been good," and I'm like, "What are you talking about? It's terrible." But he was looking at the side of it that, if you know, when we come out on the other side of this pandemic, we can really examine all these institutions. And so I think from a philosophical, Aurora, this is exactly what you said. We can follow and we can examine these institutions and see where they're broken. This has really brought out the cracks in the different democracies, as somebody said, around the world. I'm not sure if that was, again, I'm not sure if I'm answering questions or just philosophizing myself, but very good, interesting questions. All opened up. I'll stop now.
It's very unique what happened in America, especially with the legal system. Like, what must come first when it comes to law? Certainty or justice? Will it be justice if the people of Seattle can be free to use ganja? Meanwhile, maybe in New York, it's not the same term. I don't know. Or is it correlated to each other? When it is certain, then there will come the justice. Which one must put forward? If you know, we cannot conclude what's the ideal of the democracy, but we still believe in law. So yeah.
Yeah, we could do a whole, but yeah, is legal certainty justice? Does that, you know, of course, in contract law, we say legal certainty is very important, but is it important? Does legal certainty equal justice? Yeah, there's so little legal certainty right now, especially in dealing with these violations of pandemic issues. You know, people getting shot in the streets in South Africa. You know what? Yeah. So, do these things equate to each other? I think that's a really good question. And I don't, of course, don't have an answer. But yeah, what's the ultimate goal? Is the ultimate goal justice? Is the ultimate goal preserving the democracy? Is the ultimate goal us all just living for another year or being able to, you know, yeah, and do those goals, do they converge or are they separate?
Thank you.
Again, I didn't answer your question once again, but
Okay.
hold on.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kesan. Now, Prof. Jaco, you seem like you want to add something.
Yeah, I'd like to add there for someone that lived in a minority ruled country where there was massive human rights violations. When people say the rule of law is absolute, it scares the ever-living hell out of me. Because how apartheid South Africa worked was they used laws. They made laws to suppress other racial groups. So for me, the construct of democracy is justice. And some of you that attended some of my law seminars I did before, when we speak about criminal justice, for me, it's a huge misnomer. Who's put in place there? Criminal justice. So you put the criminal in front of the word justice. It should be the justice system, not the criminal justice system, because your focus is suddenly on someone that violated a law. Whether this law is just or not, you already label someone as offending. And the idea of certainty in law should still be weighed against the just of the law. Does this law serve its people, or does it serve a specific grouping or a political elite for this law to be applied? South Africa, apartheid South Africa is a brilliant example how the rule of law and the use of the idea, the concept of the rule of law was so misappropriated that now 27 years after democracy, this idea of the rule of law is still problematic. The idea that if the law says this, you need to comply, whether it is justice. So the better is to think about democracy as a system of giving justice to its people than to give laws, because laws can be perverted. Not just South Africa. I mean, look at Germany, 1928 to 1945. You know, so but I come from a country where, like, so when people say the law is everything, I get like hives and like cold sweats when someone says that, because some people didn't live through countries where the law was misused in ways that you cannot even imagine. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Thank you, Prof. Jaco.
Thank you, Prof. Jaco. Ibu Diani, you may want to give comments.
Maybe I will give an opportunity to Dr. Hartini.
Okay, go ahead.
Bilaterally with Miss Aurora.
Okay.
We have time.
Yeah. All right. I don't mind if you want to respond. Honestly, it was a very difficult question, though, Aurora. We're coming from a country that we are currently, in the state of emergency. Now we are talking about democracy, but I think I would just want to add here about the principle of inclusivity and the inclusion of all groups of people, categories of people is very, very important when any decision is being made. And I think this has been a debate or a discourse in Malaysia to talk about the inclusivity and make sure that all walks of life, all categories of people are being taken care of. And I think COVID-19 really impacts not just our life, but also democracy, the concept of democracy and human rights. And it's actually a trade-off between taking care of public health and upholding the traditional notion of democracy. Not to mention, in Malaysia, the parliament is still pending. We can't actually have the election. So we don't really talk about the traditional notion of democracy, and that's where I think some contemporary scholars have actually started a discourse on reimagining the concept of democracy, especially since last year. So I think one of the reimagination or transformation of the concept of democracy is the concept of inclusivity. And this inclusion would actually have certain spillover, including the concept of transparency and upholding human rights and natural justice. And I'm not saying that we are here happily ever after and it's perfect here in Malaysia. And of course, in any, like I think Jacko mentioned something very, very practical, very relevant. Law is not everything. And I think I've highlighted that in my presentation, that eventually, when we talk about pandemic and post-pandemic life, we have to certain extent acknowledge that it should be our culture. And when that has become a culture, I think we would eventually innovate certain traditional concepts, including the concept of democracy. I'm not sure whether that answers your question, but that was a very difficult question. I don't know how to answer, but I hope you would satisfy with that. Yep.
Okay, we still have time, yeah. So I think learning from the previous speakers, for me, that choosing whether to enact democracy or dictatorship is just a matter of preference. So for me, that the system has its own benefit and weakness. It's because you know that no one policy fits for all. Yeah, it depends on the country. And this is a debate in itself that has existed for a long time. However, that in Indonesia, as stipulated in our constitution, believe our Pancasila, democracy is the best system to run our nation. In all situations, our type of democracy is specifically designed to accommodate all the people.
Many kinds of the
It is
difference
very rich in
of
diversity.
conception.
So, therefore, according to our democratic system, I believe that justice is more important than the certainty of law. That is in my opinion. And the law must always be related to the principles of justice to be seen as law. And if a law contradicts with the principle of justice, then the law is no longer normative and it in fact cannot be said to be law anymore. I think that's my my perception. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ibu. Thank you, Ibu Diani. Well, from Ibu Diani, justice is more important than the rule of law itself. Well, it was very, very interesting question from Ibu Aurora and very, very good discussions. And because of the time constraint, it will be soon will be the time for Friday praying. But I still have more time. We still have more time, so I will open up another one last question. So to the floor. So please, if you have another question or just one last question, thank you. Okay.
I think there was a question on the chat room about to everybody, addressing basically what is
Shifting power.
yeah, consolidating power within the, you know, and I think it is historical where in the king or the sultan or the dictator, you know, every dictator in the world has used, you know, from Caesar, our first democracy, on up to now, to use emergencies in order to, as a pretext, to consolidate their power. And, you know, how do we preserve democracy while addressing those things? I think that was the question, but I'm not sure, again, not sure what the answer is.
Okay, yeah, it's regarding the question from the chat room that it says that under emergency constitution, shifting power to executive, is it means also shifting the positive law to natural law paradigm? If so, it's then to the situation that the state fall within the situation of paradox law, or then to the situation that the king can do no wrong. I think it's mean that leads to the dictatorship, or yeah, dictatorship. Yeah, how constitution should regulate this? Okay. So I will open up to the speakers to answer these questions. We may can start with Professor Jaco. Professor Jaco, you may have something to answer.
Okay, so in South Africa, we have something called the Constitutional Court. We have the Bill of Rights in our constitution, and everything gets weighed against the Bill of Rights. So constitutionally speaking, like we have the three legs of parliament, the executive, and then the and then the constitutional court, right? So everything gets weighed. So when government did overstep during certain lockdown levels, people took the government to court. They took the government up to high court. The high court ruled in favor of those and struck down some lockdown regulations. Now the government, of course, tasted power now, so now they're appealing to the Supreme Court of Appeal. The chances of that succeeding, I've been looking at the government's case. It's insulting in its simplicity. The argument is we did it because we have to, you know, and damn the consequences. And I think they will not succeed with that type of argument. And even if they then they fail in their appeal, they'll go to the Constitutional Court. And again, the way the argument was made based on the Bill of Rights, on natural justice, the chances of the government winning anything, for me, will not happen, because the Constitutional Court is the highest court in our country. It's the gatekeeper of human rights and constitutional issues. So these justices know what they're doing, I hope. So yeah, you can sue your government if you have that idea of your constitution have certain Bill of Rights or human rights that are enshrined in it. Then through either civil or criminal action, you can eventually move it through the court system to a constitutional court or Supreme Court, whatever you call it in your countries. But that is the most important thing, is it's up to civil society and academics to speak out and to help people with, if you see this is wrong, to speak out, to talk about it, to make people cognizant that, hey, we're now skating very thin to the idea of a legislative dictatorship, you know, so that whatever is done can be weighed in terms of justice and human rights. Thanks.
Thank you, Prof. Jaco. Maybe Dr. Hartini want to add something?
Okay, thank you, Dr. Hendra. Yes, I think in Malaysia, we sort of having the same system as what Prof. Jaco highlighted just now. that is the emergency powers would not be invoked to interfere with the judicial system. So the courts are still in operation. So any infringement of human rights or any violation of federal constitution, for example, can still be subject to court of law. So our judiciary is still functioning. And I think this is where the maturity of the civil society, the maturity of the society is very important to really understand what amounts to the violation in order to balance the power of the executive, and not to mention that the proclamation of emergency also gives power to promulgate ordinances. So there are so many ordinances have been promulgated, and I think it's very important for the society to be educated and understand the spirit of such ordinances, such laws, and to know whether that laws are violating a certain principle, particularly principle of natural justice. But anyway, to say that we don't have any remedy at all during the period of emergency, I think that is very far-reaching. To me, and you know, in Malaysia, and I believe in many parts of the world, during the state of emergency, the judicial system still stands very strongly. But that goes another debate and discourse as to the transparency and integrity, you know, and all these are interrelated and need to be understood very clearly by all stakeholders, particularly the civil society. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hartini. Ibu Diani, you want to give some comments?
Actually, this is not my expert about constitutional law, but I just based on my experience in the government, we know that how that the government issued the government regulation in VU, that it should be consulted before to the line ministries, or and then after that maybe they can have to consult as well to the parliament. But at the time, I think the consideration of the government that is time limits. Yeah, it's it's very limit time to decide, because at the time is very emergency. But yeah, I think that Prof. Jim Lee is very inspired person. I admit that he always raise a new thinking that we have to think about what we have to do. So I don't think that with the Pa Iwan Erar said that it is the king can do no wrong, because I think we still have our constitution, and my suggestion is that the government should increase the public participation, public consultation before issued such kind of the policy, or such kind of the regulation related with that will be affected to the people. I think that's my message. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibu Diani. Mr. Kesan, do you still have something to add? No. Okay.
No, not really. Thank you.
Okay. Maybe I think that will cover all the questions. And now, because the time constraints, maybe I will give the time to our speaker to give closing statements from each of the speakers. Start from you, Mr. Kesan. Some closing statement.
Well prepared. No, this has been fascinating to hear this, and specifically, I really appreciate the program you put together and the focus of it on law enforcement, because it could be otherwise it could get out of control with talking about COVID. So it's been fascinating for me, and I hope it's been fascinating for the participants. And I appreciate your invitation, and I look forward to other discourse in the future. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum.
Thank you, Mr. Kesan. Okay, now move on to Ibu Diani. You may want to give some closing statement.
Yeah, only a short statement that it was very good, and hopefully that it can be continuation for this international conference. And regardless that we have to discuss about the law enforcement in terms of the pandemic COVID. I think especially for Indonesia people, just still apply 3M. Use your masker, don't go if not necessary, and wash your hand. Only that even the vaccine, we have vaccine, so many, the fact that the people can get the contagious from the coronavirus. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ibu Diani. Now we can move on to Prof. Joko. You may want to give some closing statement.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, happy 21st anniversary to the law school. Thank you for having me. I've enjoyed the discussion. I hope we can continue working like this. No, well, not necessarily via Zoom. I would love to have one, but just interact with my Indonesian colleagues, and because South Africa and Indonesia have a lot in common. Some words in Afrikaans, which the Dutch dialect has Indonesian words in it because of the Dutch history. So I hope, and even we started our law system as a Roman Dutch law system. Later, the Brits changed it. So we have a lot of things in common. And so I hope we can continue this discussion. And thank you for having me. I've enjoyed it immensely.
Thank you very much, Prof. Jeko. Last but not least, I give the time for a closing statement to Associate Professor Dr. Hartini.
Thank you, Dr. Henry. So once again, to the Dean of the Faculty, thank you so much for inviting me, and congratulations on your 21st anniversary. I think I've always feel delighted to share with all of you, and this is not my first time, and I've always, I would love, and I always, love to come back, and I hope next time I can go to your place physically, and vice versa. And to our co-speakers, I really enjoyed these sessions, listening to your experience. Well, I because I came late, I didn't listen to you, Christopher, but I bet it was very interesting, and also Ibu Diani. But I did listen to Professor Joko. It was, I think, very enlightening. And I hope whatever I shared would also shed some light as to what we are doing here in Malaysia. And stay safe, everyone. And hopefully, we can pull this together and stay strong and take care. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you very much, Ibu Hartini. Thank you to all speakers for the closing statement. To conclude, I think we are all agree that we need to take a more holistic approach in enforcing the law during this pandemic. We also need more innovations that involves all stakeholders to battle the pandemic and enforcing the law at the same time. I think this will be the end of our discussion. As the moderator, please accept my sincere apology if there is a mistake in guiding you to through the discussions. Okay, I think time is over now, and I will give the floor to the Master of Ceremony. Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
Okay, much appreciated to all inspiring speakers and our amazing moderator, Mr. Wijaya, who filled this session with fascinating insights and brought a positive atmosphere. Thank you very much. Now that the panel session and debriefing session are over, We are going to have a break for about an hour and a quarter. Those who will go to have a prayer may dismiss the room. According to our schedule, we should be back at 1:30 p.m. Western Indonesia time in the same Zoom link. And after the break time is over, we will move to the next agenda, that is the panel presentation or parallel session. But before that, we will have a photo session. So to all of the participants, please turn on your camera. And please do this pose. This is a characteristic pose from UPN Veteran Jakarta. Salam Bela Negara pose. To one of our documentation committees, please turn on your microphone to give us a countdown. Kepada tim dokumentasi, bisa nyalakan mic-nya.
Okay na photo.
Okay, get ready. I'll check in 3, 2, 1. Okay, again.
Yari na bertanya tuh ini.
3,
atau
2,
dari Amerika
1.
Serikat atau dari peranakan pinternya bahasa Inggris.
Yang
Ya,
pencerahan.
pun ya uang batu. Wah, emang. Apa maksud dan tujuan untuk ini?
Okay, thank you so much for one of our committee. Thank you for your kind attention and enjoy your break time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you all. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Ibu.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Saripan. Thank you very much.
Bye, Prof.
Thank you for inviting, yeah.
Bye, Prof. Christopher.
Thank you so much. It was truly my pleasure.
Thank you Bu Diani. Salam Pak Cipto.
Ya, ada di situ kok.
Oh ya. Saya di Parung ini di bawah pohon durian.
Papa, saya buka puasa aja, Pak. Terima kasih, Pak. Mohon izin lift ya.
Parung Kendra, thank you.
Ya. Oh, Pak Christopher.
Yes.
You can speak Indonesia now because you are in Jogja now.
Sedikit saja masih. Maaf, ada WhatsApp?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
WhatsApp.
Christopher, you can speak Indonesia? Well, hard to hear.
Nje, sedikit saja ya.
Nje Jawa itu.
I bet you can speak Japanese.
Oh no.
I will speak Indonesia with you.
Ada di Amerika, ada juga di Jogja. Kebetulan ke Jogja.
Oh, so now you are in Jogja.
I'm in Jogja now,
ini di Singapura.
Sudah? Kamu di Singapura? Tinggal?
Siapa? Saya? Who?
I don't know. I heard.
I think Prof. Arafa just now mentioned.
I just want to tell you that my brother is in
in Singapore. Yeah. Where's your brother? Di mana? Tinggal di mana?
Pak Cipto.
What?
Bellevue.
Bellevue?
Yes.
Near Seattle.
Yes, Seattle. Yes.
Oh.
Almost 30 years. He worked for PT Dirgantara Indonesia.
Wait, say again?
You know, join with the Boeing.
Boeing, yeah. Of course. Yeah.
Three times went to Seattle. Oh.
Really?
Yes. Because my brother with his family and his family now their children already married with the Pakistan, American, and then with the UK. They're all Islam.
Right. Wow, that's very interesting. Yeah, Bellevue is the rich part. Kaya.
Elite. In Indonesia.
Elite, yeah.
No wonder, because working in Boeing.
Yeah, it's kind of the well, it's where Bill Gates lives in Medina, Bellevue. Yeah, so
And
It's
I
very
think
interesting.
many Indonesian people stay there, live there, yeah. And
Well, a friend of mine was here from Bellevue. He was born in Bellevue. He was here in Jogja yesterday, and we talked about there's no good Indonesian restaurants
yes,
in Seattle. We need Indonesian food in Seattle. There's so many Indonesian people.
Oh, Mbak Dian siapa dulu, Mbak Dian?
actually, wife is very good cooking, yeah, cookers, as chef at the University of Washington, as the
Yeah, well,
yeah.
around the U district there. Yeah.
Yes. And their children all graduated from the Washington, Seattle.
Sorry, can I ask permission to leave the room?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Yes, I have to
so
go
much.
too. So,
Yeah.
assalamualaikum. Nice to meet you. Please keep
Nice to
in
meet you.
touch.
Yeah,
about
with
Diana,
Thank you
and
so much.
Pak
Thank you so much.
Christopher.
I will ask the moderators to put our
Yes.
information so we can exchange
Yes.
information.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I need to leave
Thank
the
you
room.
so
Thank
much.
you very
Okay.
Thank you, Pak Abdul Halim. Thank you,
Yeah,
everyone.
thank you.
Mbak Dian. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Christopher.
Thank
Bu
you so
Diani.
much. It was nice seeing you again.
Nice seeing you. Thank
Sudah
you.
diberi kepercayaan.
Kasih Bu Diani.
Sama-sama Pak. Yang sehat ya Pak.
Amin.
Kebanyakan
Kasih Bu Dian Koranita.
jangan buka masker. Protokol kesehatan itu penting.
Pamit Pak Abdul Halim. Jumatan dulu. Jumatan.
Terima kasih Injar.
Ya Bu Diani, Pak Cipto sudah ke masjid kali ya?
Udah ke masjid. Bosan di rumah.
Pak Heru.
Ini masih di Aston ya?
Masih Bu. Tapi 3M nih Bu.
Ya itulah. Itu paling tidak harusnya sebenarnya cukup 3 jam keluar dulu. Ada masuk.
Iya.
Ya mudah sehat semuanya ya.
Amin.
Sukses semuanya lancar. Terima kasih. Mohon izinnya. Mohon izin.
Mohon.
Terima kasih Bu.
Orang di samping duduknya dia. Kan masa Dian yang satu saja.
Dian
Yang satu lagi.
Dian yang pakai I sama Dian yang nggak pakai I, belakangnya kan bunyi.
Pak Taufikur Rahman, saya sudah kirim tadi ya.
Iya Pak.
Oke, mantap.
Siap.